Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he's not aware of Chinese authorities attempting to block cameras at a joint press conference with Premier Li. Joining me now at the desk is Sky News host Cheng Lei. So, look, I know in journalism you're not supposed to be the story, but you couldn't help it because they were seemingly concerned, these officials, Chinese officials, about the visuals of a shot that would combine you and the Premier. For our viewers, in case they're not aware, of course, you were detained on these basically trumped up national security charges, and it was a pretty harrowing time for you. It must have been a strange and sort of unsettling few moments down there. I mean, I'm not saying you didn't hold your nerve. You even shifted seats to sort of go, no, I'm happy to, get me with a better view.
Well, I wanted to get away from the guy who was standing next to me.
Fair enough.
And I think the worry is that my being there is a symbol of some sort. Maybe they didn't want that for the domestic audience. That's a guess. But like you said, we don't want this incident to overshadow the rest of the visit, which is the real news. It's enough of a circus without me being the sideshow.
Yeah, well, no, you were just sitting there trying to do your job and
being distracted by all this kerfuffle.
And these embassy officials, as you try to change seats and it kept happening. But as much as that's the case, it's still noteworthy the Prime Minister said, wasn't aware of that. I mean...
Well, he did have a state lunch too, host.
But he's got a big media team, I mean...
Well, what I know is that they've been working like crazy. And having dealt with Chinese officialdom on these sorts of events, and not even as important as these ones, they are very, very control freakish. So they want to know everything and they want to stage manage everything. So I can imagine it would have created a huge workload for DFAT, for our government officials.
Yeah, you could see one of our officials sort of trying to suggest they should move on. Let's us move on. I want to talk about the protests as well.
Yep.
So when people drive in, and this has been the scene around Australia, but in Canberra, you often see anti-Chinese Communist Party protesters, and a lot of them tend to be expats in some way. The pro-Chinese government people, I guess, they're not protesters, are they? But they're
demonstrators.
Demonstrators. Yeah. What do you make of them? We've got a big Chinese Australian community. Do you think of them as people just genuinely sort of proud of their homeland? Is there a bit of pressure sometimes for them to attend? How do you construe how they come to be there?
I was talking to someone who was there among them, and his estimate was that probably 30% of the pro-supporters were genuine, and it would have been some students who are very patriotic, who have grown up drinking the Kool-Aid, and they just see this whole, just see China being bullied by Western democracies. Pretty naive. And you probably have a lot of the so-called local Chinese communities or chambers of commerce that might be just funded or supported by the Chinese government, and working at subtly influencing people, influencing policy, influencing our politicians.
Suggesting to people, be a good idea to get along, that sort of communication in whatever way. It's probably, not an email, something, a WhatsApp or something like that these days.
Well, even, the fact that some of them were promised payment and then the payment didn't arise, which I find amusing. And I don't know if they...
I think you could fund a few hundred protesters.
I was very curious about what their day rate would be.
Yeah, well...
cost of living crisis and all.
Well, exactly. The other interesting thing that I just wanted to touch on as well, we were speaking before around, the cyber attacks. My next guest has been very pointed on that. Yet there's also a memorandum of understanding that's been signed on energy transition. And perhaps, we've already got Chinese investment in the Australian economy, it's increasing in energy. Perhaps those attacks dissipate if that, cooperation ramps up, because it's becoming pretty mutually beneficial. If countries are going to reduce emissions, everyone needs to sort of be on board and pedalling in the same direction.
Exactly. This is an area that's seen as a possible way forward for cooperation. And you see the list of companies, the Chinese companies on this delegation, Trina Solar, Goldwind, among others, some of the biggest names in renewables, and a lot of the big financial companies as well, CITIC, Bank of China, China Development Bank. So if we do have, more investment in that field, one would hope that that would be a disincentive towards cyber attacks.
Just finally, what would people in China be seeing tonight on the news? What would they be presented with from this visit?
On the state news, on every state visit abroad, you will see welcoming crowds, you will see the Chinese flag flying high, you will see probably 90% China, Chinese officials, Li speaking, and perhaps a few shots of our Prime Minister nodding, listening, our officials standing there meekly, and there will be the usual mutual cooperation, a grand success, friendship. You saw what he wrote on the visitor's book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. May the tree of friendship be evergreen. So, that'll be the simplistic messaging for...
Carefully curated, of course.
What they hope is a very simple audience, but I don't think all of them are.
No, increasingly, they have other ways of getting news, don't they, Cheng Lei? I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.